Welcome to today's tarot reading, Compassionate Souls. If you've ever felt like your inner perfectionist is both your superpower and your biggest saboteur, this one's for you. Today we're diving into how to be a perfectionist healthily without the burnout, the spirals, or the I must do everything flawlessly or else energy. This is a two-group pick a card reading, so take a breath, tune into your intuition, and choose the group that's calling your name. Your message will meet you exactly where you are. What you'll get in this reading are how to transform perfectionism into a strength, where your high standards help you shine, where they might be holding you back. Practical, grounded guidance for balance. A little real talk and a lot of love. But remember, what came through today was lovingly revealed by compassionate deities, your spirit guide, the angels, and the universe, all working together to offer you insight and clarity. Please remember, this reading is for entertainment purposes only. Life is always changing, and your path is shaped by your choices, actions, and the intentions you set. Nothing is set in stone, and your free will is your greatest power. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and above all, stay kind to yourself. Thank you for being here. Before we begin, I want to say something that might seem obvious, but it truly matters and it deserves to be said clearly. Any guidance you hear in this reading should never be used to justify harm, cruelty, manipulation, violence, or abuse of any kind. I absolutely do not condone that. This reading is meant to support healthy choices, emotional growth, and kind outcomes for everyone involved. Otherwise, please seek professional support. Your well-being and the well-being of others always comes first. When I look at the cards for Group 1, the first thing that stands out is the emotional weight behind them. Not dramatic weight, not chaotic weight, but the kind of heaviness that builds slowly over time when someone has been trying to hold themselves together for too long. The Ten of Wands reversed opens this reading with a very clear message. You've been carrying responsibilities, expectations, and internal pressure that have pushed you past what is reasonable for one person. And the reversal shows that you're reaching a point where your system is no longer willing to operate under those conditions. It's not collapse. It's not failure. It's your mind and body saying, this way of living isn't sustainable anymore. The Ten of Wands reversed is the moment where the internal structure you've built around perfectionism starts to loosen. Not because you've chosen to let go, but because something inside you is tired of being stretched thin. You may have noticed this in small ways. Difficulty concentrating, irritability, feeling like you're always behind even when you're doing everything you can, or a sense of emotional numbness that wasn't there before. These are signs that your perfectionism has crossed from being a motivator into being a burden. And the card is showing that you're at a turning point where you can no longer keep pushing yourself in the same way without consequences. This isn't a criticism. It's an observation, a clinical one. When someone has been operating under chronic internal pressure, the mind eventually starts to push back. It's a protective mechanism. The Ten of Wands reversed is that mechanism kicking in. It's the part of you that's saying, you don't have to keep carrying everything alone. You don't have to keep proving yourself through exhaustion. You don't have to keep performing strength when you're depleted. This card is the beginning of a shift toward healthier perfectionism because it forces you to acknowledge that your current pattern isn't working. Then the star appears upright, and this is where the reading softens. The star is the card of recalibration. It's the moment after burnout where you start to reconnect with yourself in a quieter, more honest way. The star doesn't demand anything from you. It doesn't push you to improve or achieve. It simply invites you to breathe, to slow down, to remember who you are when you're not under pressure. This card is the emotional counterbalance to the Ten of Wands reversed. It's the reminder that healing doesn't come from doing more. It comes from allowing space. The star upright is also the part of you that still believes in your potential, even if you've been feeling drained. It's the part of you that wants to grow in a way that feels aligned rather than forced. Healthy perfectionism isn't about lowering your standards. It's about shifting the motivation behind them. The star is the version of you who strives for excellence because it feels meaningful, not because you're afraid of falling short. It's the version of you who creates because it brings you joy, not because you're trying to avoid criticism. It's the version of you who trusts that progress doesn't have to be painful to be valid. But then the Four of Pentacles upright enters the reading, and this is where the therapeutic work deepens. This card represents the part of you that clings tightly to control. It's the part of you that believes that if you loosen your grip even slightly, everything will fall apart. The Four of Pentacles is the perfectionist who fears vulnerability. It's the voice that says, if I don't manage every detail, something will go wrong. If I don't stay on top of everything, I'll be judged. If I don't hold myself to impossible standards, I'll lose stability. This card isn't calling you rigid. It's showing the emotional logic behind your perfectionism. When someone grows up in an environment where mistakes were punished, or where unpredictability created anxiety, or where approval was conditional, the nervous system learns to equate control with safety. The Four of Pentacles is that learned response. It's the part of you that believes that letting go is dangerous. And when this belief becomes ingrained, perfectionism becomes less about excellence and more about self-protection. Healthy perfectionism requires loosening that grip, but not in a reckless way. It's not about abandoning structure. It's about recognizing that control is not the same as safety. You can be organized without being rigid. You can be disciplined without being self-punishing. You can have high standards without believing that your worth depends on meeting them. The Four of Pentacles is asking you to examine the emotional cost of your current level of control. Not to shame yourself, but to understand yourself. Then the Five of Cups upright appears, and this is where the emotional core of your perfectionism becomes visible. This card represents grief, disappointment, and the pain of feeling like you've fallen short. Many perfectionists carry a quiet sadness that they rarely acknowledge. It's the sadness of never feeling good enough, no matter how much they accomplish. It's the sadness of missed opportunities because fear held them back. It's the sadness of relationships strained by unrealistic expectations. It's the sadness of constantly comparing themselves to an idealized version of who they think they should be. The Five of Cups shows that part of your perfectionism is rooted in unresolved emotional wounds. You may have internalized the belief that mistakes are unacceptable. You may have learned that your value comes from performance. You may have been taught, directly or indirectly, that vulnerability is unsafe. This card is asking you to acknowledge the emotional pain beneath your standards. Not to dwell on it, but to understand it. Because healing perfectionism requires healing the wounds that created it. The Five of Cups also shows that you may be carrying regret. Regret for times you were too hard on yourself. Regret for opportunities you didn't take because you feared failure. Regret for relationships where you held yourself to impossible expectations. But the card also shows that not all is lost. There are still two cups standing behind you. There is still hope, still potential, still joy available to you. You just have to turn toward it. And turning toward it requires letting go of the belief that your past defines your future. Then Strength Reversed enters the reading, and this is where the therapeutic tone becomes more direct. Strength Reversed shows that your inner critic has been louder than your inner compassion. It shows that you've been trying to motivate yourself through pressure rather than encouragement. It shows that you've been pushing yourself past your limits because you believe you should be stronger, more disciplined, more capable. This card is the emotional exhaustion that comes from constantly demanding more from yourself. Strength reversed is not weakness. It's a sign of chronic self-pressure. When someone has been operating under perfectionistic expectations for a long time, they often lose touch with their internal sense of gentleness. They start to believe that the only way to grow is through force. They start to believe that rest is laziness. They start to believe that self-criticism is necessary for improvement. But this card is showing that this approach is draining you. It's not sustainable. And it's not helping you become the version of yourself you want to be. Healthy perfectionism requires inner gentleness. It requires understanding that strength isn't about pushing harder. It's about knowing when to rest. It's about knowing when to soften. It's about knowing when to forgive yourself. Strength reversed is asking you to examine the way you talk to yourself. If your internal voice is harsh, demanding, or critical, it's not motivating you. It's wearing you down. And the card is showing that you're ready to shift this pattern. Then the Chariot upright appears, and this is the turning point of the reading. The Chariot is the embodiment of healthy perfectionism. It's focused, determined, disciplined, and powerful, but it's not driven by fear. It's driven by purpose. The Chariot is the version of you who knows where you're going and why. It's the version of you who uses your high standards as a tool rather than a weapon. It's the version of you who moves forward with clarity rather than anxiety. The Chariot shows that you are capable of incredible things when your energy is aligned. You don't need to abandon your ambition. You don't need to lower your standards. You simply need to shift the way you pursue them. The Chariot is the reminder that you can be both disciplined and compassionate, both driven and balanced, both ambitious and grounded. You can strive for excellence without sacrificing your well-being. You can pursue your goals without losing yourself in the process. Now, let's talk about what healthy perfectionism actually looks like for you. It looks like setting high standards because they inspire you, not because you fear judgment. It looks like taking pride in your work without tying your identity to the outcome. It looks like allowing yourself to rest without guilt. It looks like celebrating progress rather than obsessing over flaws. It looks like trusting that you can handle challenges without needing to control every detail. It looks like being kind to yourself when things don't go as planned. It looks like understanding that excellence is a journey, not a destination. Healthy perfectionism is rooted in self-trust. It's rooted in the belief that you are capable, resilient, and worthy, even when things aren't perfect. It's rooted in the understanding that mistakes are opportunities, not threats. It's rooted in the ability to hold yourself to high standards while still allowing space for growth. It's rooted in the willingness to let go of the need for external validation. It's rooted in the courage to show up authentically. As you move through this transformation, you may notice moments where your old patterns try to pull you back. You may feel the urge to overwork, overthink, or overcontrol. You may feel the familiar fear of making mistakes. You may feel the pressure to be everything for everyone. But each time this happens, you have the opportunity to choose differently. You can choose to pause instead of push. You can choose to breathe instead of panic. You can choose to trust instead of tighten. You can choose to speak to yourself with kindness instead of criticism. When you begin shifting your relationship with perfectionism, something interesting happens internally. You start noticing the moments where your old patterns try to reassert themselves. You might catch yourself double-checking something you already know is fine. You might feel a sudden wave of anxiety when you consider delegating a task. You might feel uncomfortable when you rest, even if you're exhausted. These reactions aren't signs of failure. They're signs that your nervous system is adjusting to a new way of functioning. When someone has relied on perfectionism as a coping mechanism for a long time, letting go of it can feel unsafe at first. Not because it is unsafe, but because it's unfamiliar. This is where the therapeutic work becomes more nuanced. You're not just changing habits. You're changing the emotional meaning behind those habits. Perfectionism has been your way of creating predictability, stability, and control. It has been your way of protecting yourself from criticism, disappointment, or unpredictability. When you start loosening your grip, your mind may interpret that as vulnerability. And vulnerability can feel threatening when you're used to relying on control. But this is where the star and the chariot work together. The star gives you the emotional space to breathe, and the chariot gives you the direction to move forward with intention. Healthy perfectionism is not passive. It's not about letting life happen to you. It's about choosing where to direct your energy. The chariot is the part of you that knows how to move forward with clarity. It's the part of you that understands that discipline doesn't have to be harsh. It can be structured, steady, and grounded. It can be rooted in self-respect rather than self-punishment. When you operate from this place, your standards become a reflection of your values rather than your fears. But to reach that point, you have to address the emotional residue shown in the Five of Cups. This card is not just about sadness. It's about the way unprocessed emotions shape your behavior. When someone carries regret or disappointment, they often try to compensate by being perfect. They believe that if they can avoid mistakes in the future, they can prevent the pain of the past from repeating. But this creates a cycle where perfectionism becomes a shield against emotional discomfort. And that shield becomes heavy over time. The Five of Cups is asking you to acknowledge the emotional experiences that shaped your perfectionism, not to relive them, but to understand them. When you understand the origin of a pattern, you gain the power to change it. You may realize that your perfectionism developed in response to feeling unsupported, or in response to feeling judged, or in response to feeling like you had to earn approval. These realizations aren't meant to blame anyone. They're meant to give you clarity, because clarity is the foundation of change. Strength reversed reinforces this. It shows that your internal dialogue has been shaped by old emotional wounds. When someone grows up believing they must be strong at all times, they often develop an internal voice that is harsh, demanding, or critical. This voice may have helped you survive difficult situations in the past. It may have pushed you to achieve things you're proud of. But now it's limiting you. It's draining you. And it's preventing you from developing a healthier relationship with yourself. Strength reversed is asking you to examine the way you speak to yourself. If your internal voice is constantly pushing you, criticizing you, or telling you that you're not doing enough, it's time to shift that pattern. Not by silencing the voice, but by understanding it. That voice developed to protect you. It believed that if it kept you in line, you would avoid failure or rejection. But now you're in a different stage of life. You don't need protection through pressure. You need support through compassion. This is where the therapeutic tone becomes more direct. You cannot build healthy perfectionism on top of self-criticism. You cannot grow sustainably if your motivation comes from fear. You cannot thrive if your internal voice is constantly telling you that you're not enough. Healthy perfectionism requires a foundation of self-trust. And self-trust cannot grow in an environment of self-punishment. You have to create internal conditions that support your growth rather than undermine it. The chariot shows that you are capable of this shift. It shows that you have the determination, focus, and discipline to create a healthier relationship with your standards. But it also shows that you need to be intentional about the direction you're moving in. If you continue operating from fear, you'll continue feeling drained. If you shift toward purpose, you will feel more grounded. The chariot is the reminder that you are not powerless. You are not stuck. You are not defined by your past patterns. You have the ability to choose a new path. Now, let's talk about what this new path looks like in practical terms. Healthy perfectionism is not about lowering your standards. It's about shifting the emotional foundation beneath them. When your standards come from fear, they feel heavy. They feel urgent. They feel like life or death situations. When your standards come from purpose, they feel motivating. They feel meaningful. They feel aligned. The difference is not in the standard itself, but in the emotional energy behind it. For example, imagine you're working on a project. Unhealthy perfectionism says, if this isn't perfect, I'll be judged. I'll fail. I'll disappoint people. Healthy perfectionism says, I want to do this well because it matters to me. Because I care about the outcome. Because I value excellence. The The behavior might look similar on the outside, but the internal experience is completely different. One is driven by fear. The other is driven by purpose. The cards are showing that you are ready to make this shift. The Ten of Wands reversed shows that your system is rejecting the old pattern. The Star shows that healing is available to you. The Four of Pentacles shows that you need to loosen your grip on control. The Five of Cups shows that you need to acknowledge the emotional wounds beneath your perfectionism. Strength reversed shows that you need to soften your internal voice. And the Chariot shows that you have the capacity to move forward with clarity and intention. Now we move into the part of the reading where your spirit guides step forward. Their energy comes through in a calm, steady way. Not dramatic, not overwhelming. More like a quiet presence that has been with you for a long time, waiting for you to slow down enough to hear them. They want to speak to you about the way you've been carrying yourself. They've watched you push yourself beyond your limits. They've watched you hold yourself to standards that no human could consistently meet. They've watched you take on responsibilities that were never yours. And they want you to know that you don't have to live like that anymore. Your guides are showing that your perfectionism developed as a survival strategy. It was your way of creating stability in environments that felt unpredictable. It was your way of earning approval when you didn't feel unconditionally accepted. It was your way of protecting yourself from criticism or disappointment. They're not judging you for this. They're acknowledging the intelligence behind it. But they're also showing that you're no longer in the same environment. You're no longer the same person. You don't need the same strategies. Your guides want you to understand that you are allowed to rest. You are allowed to make mistakes. You are allowed to be imperfect. They're showing that your worth is not conditional. It's not tied to your productivity. It's not tied to your achievements. It's not tied to your ability to hold everything together. They want you to know that you are valued for who you are, not for what you do. They're also showing that you're entering a chapter where your energy will be needed for things that truly matter to you, not for obligations that drain you, not for expectations that limit you, not for roles that you've outgrown. They want you to conserve your energy for the things that align with your purpose. They want you to move forward with clarity, not fear. They want you to trust your intuition, not your inner critic. Your guides are encouraging you to practice self-trust in small ways. They're showing that you don't have to overhaul your entire life at once. You can start by making small choices that reflect your new relationship with perfectionism. You can start by allowing yourself to rest when you're tired. You can start by speaking to yourself with kindness when you make a mistake. You can start by letting go of tasks that aren't yours to carry. You can start by choosing progress over perfection. They're also showing that you have a tendency to underestimate your resilience. You may believe that if you loosen your grip, everything will fall apart. But your guides are showing that you're stronger than you realize. Not in the sense of pushing through exhaustion, but in the sense of being able to adapt, recover, and grow. They want you to trust that you can handle challenges without relying on perfectionism as a shield. Your guides are also reminding you that vulnerability is not weakness. It's a form of strength. When you allow yourself to be imperfect, you create space for connection. When you allow yourself to rest, you create space for clarity. When you allow yourself to make mistakes, you create space for growth. They want you to understand that your humanity is not something to hide. It's something to embrace. As this reading comes to a close, the message becomes clear. You are stepping into a new chapter of your life where your relationship with perfectionism will transform. You are learning how to pursue excellence without sacrificing your well-being. You are learning how to trust yourself without needing to control everything. You are learning how to move forward with purpose rather than pressure. The cards are showing that you are ready for this shift. Your guides are supporting you every step of the way, and your future is brighter, calmer, and more aligned than you realize. Your guides are also bringing attention to something subtle but important, the way you respond to uncertainty. They're showing that when you don't have all the information, your mind tends to fill in the gaps with worst-case scenarios. This is a common pattern for people who rely on perfectionism as a form of protection. When you're used to controlling outcomes, uncertainty feels like a threat. But your guides want you to understand that uncertainty is not a sign that something will go wrong. It's simply a space where possibilities haven't taken shape yet. They're encouraging you to practice tolerating that space without rushing to manage it. This is part of developing healthier perfectionism. It's learning to let things unfold without assuming the outcome depends entirely on you. They're also showing that you have a tendency to minimize your progress. You may achieve something meaningful and immediately shift your focus to what still needs improvement. You may receive praise and brush it off because you believe you could have done better. You may complete a difficult task and feel relief rather than pride. Your guides want you to slow down and acknowledge your growth. Not in a performative way, but in a grounded, internal way. They want you to recognize the effort you've put in, the resilience you've shown, and the ways you've already changed. This isn't about inflating your ego. It's about balancing your internal narrative. When you only focus on what needs improvement, you reinforce the belief that you're never enough. When you acknowledge your progress, you create a more accurate and compassionate view of yourself. Your guides are also highlighting the importance of boundaries. They're showing that part of your perfectionism comes from taking on responsibilities that don't belong to you. You may feel obligated to fix situations, manage other people's emotions, or prevent problems before they happen. This creates a constant sense of pressure because you're carrying more than your share. Healthy perfectionism requires boundaries. It requires understanding what is yours to manage and what is not. It requires recognizing that you are not responsible for other people's reactions, decisions, or expectations. Your guides want you to practice stepping back when you feel the urge to overextend yourself. Not because you're withdrawing, but because you're learning to protect your energy. They're also encouraging you to reconnect with activities that bring you genuine enjoyment. When perfectionism becomes overwhelming, people often lose touch with the things that make them feel alive. They become so focused on productivity that they forget what pleasure feels like. Your guides want you to reintroduce small moments of joy into your life, not as a reward for hard work, but as a natural part of being human. This could be anything that helps you feel grounded, creative, or peaceful. These moments aren't distractions. They're nourishment. They help regulate your nervous system and create emotional balance, which in turn supports healthier perfectionism. Your guides are also reminding you that healing is not linear. There will be days where you feel aligned and confident, and days where old patterns resurface. This doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. They want you to approach these moments with curiosity rather than judgment. When you notice yourself slipping into old perfectionistic habits, instead of criticizing yourself, ask what triggered the reaction. Ask what you're afraid of. Ask what you need. This approach helps you build self-awareness, which is essential for long-term change. They're also showing that you're entering a period of your life where clarity will come more easily. You've spent a long time operating from survival mode, which makes it difficult to see your path clearly. But as you release the pressure you've been carrying, your intuition will become stronger. You'll start to recognize what aligns with you and what doesn't. You'll start to feel the difference between fear-based decisions and purpose-based decisions. You'll start to trust your internal guidance more. This is part of stepping into the chariot energy. It's not just about moving forward. It's about moving forward with intention. Your guides want you to know that you're not behind. You're not late. You're not failing. You're exactly where you need to be to make the shift. Everything you've experienced has prepared you for this moment. The exhaustion, the pressure, the self-doubt, the emotional weight. None of it was wasted. It all brought you to a point where you're ready to build a healthier relationship with yourself. They want you to understand that this transformation is not about becoming a different person. It's about becoming a more supported version of yourself. A version who still strives for excellence, but from a place of balance rather than fear. As this expanded reading comes to a close, the message becomes even clearer. You are stepping into a chapter where your standards will no longer be a source of pressure, but a reflection of your values. You are learning how to pursue your goals without sacrificing your well-being. You are learning how to trust yourself without relying on control. You are learning how to move forward with clarity, purpose, and emotional steadiness. The cards show your readiness. Your guides show your support. And your future shows your potential. Thank you for being here. Before we begin, I want to say something that might seem obvious, but it truly matters and it deserves to be said clearly. Any guidance you hear in this reading should never be used to justify harm, cruelty, manipulation, violence, or abuse of any kind. I absolutely do not condone that. This reading is meant to support healthy choices, emotional growth, and kind outcomes for everyone involved. Otherwise, please seek professional support. Your well-being and the well-being of others always comes first. Healthy perfectionism also involves creating space for joy. You cannot live your life solely through the lens of improvement. You have to allow yourself to experience pleasure, creativity, spontaneity, and fun. You have to allow yourself to enjoy the process rather than constantly evaluating it. You have to allow yourself to be present rather than always analyzing what could be better. Joy is not a distraction from your goals. Joy is what sustains you. It's what keeps your spirit alive. It's what reminds you why you care in the first place. When you make space for joy, you reconnect with the part of yourself that creates out of love rather than pressure. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that your standards are meant to serve you, not imprison you. Standards are meant to guide you, inspire you, and help you grow. They are not meant to suffocate you. They are not meant to make you feel inadequate. They are not meant to drain your energy. When your standards become a source of stress rather than motivation, it's a sign that they need to be adjusted. You are allowed to refine your standards as you evolve. You are allowed to choose standards that support your well-being rather than undermine it. Healthy perfectionism also involves understanding that you cannot control how others perceive you. You can do your best. You can put in the effort. You can create something meaningful. But you cannot control how it will be received. You cannot control other people's opinions, expectations, or interpretations. When you tie your perfectionism to external validation, you give away your power. You allow other people's reactions to determine your sense of worth. Healthy perfectionism asks you to reclaim that power. It asks you to create for yourself, not for approval. It asks you to measure your success by your own standards, not by someone else's. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to shift direction. You are allowed to evolve. You are allowed to outgrow old goals. You are allowed to pursue new dreams. Perfectionism often makes people feel like they have to commit to one path and follow it flawlessly. But life is not linear. Growth is not predictable. You are allowed to explore. You are allowed to experiment. You are allowed to discover new parts of yourself. Healthy perfectionism embraces this fluidity. It allows you to adapt without feeling like you failed. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you do not have to be exceptional at everything. You are allowed to be average at some things. You are allowed to be a beginner. You are allowed to learn slowly. You are allowed to make mistakes. You are allowed to grow at your own pace. Perfectionism often creates the illusion that you must excel in every area of your life. But that is not realistic. It is not sustainable. And it is not necessary. Healthy perfectionism asks you to focus on the areas that truly matter to you and to let go of the pressure to be perfect in everything. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that your value does not come from being useful. You do not have to constantly produce, help, or perform in order to be worthy. You are allowed to exist without proving anything. You are allowed to rest without guilt. You are allowed to receive without earning it. The Six of Pentacles reverse speaks strongly to this. It shows that you've been giving so much of yourself that you've forgotten you're allowed to receive. Healthy perfectionism restores that balance. It reminds you that you deserve support, care, and kindness just as much as anyone else. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to set boundaries with your own ambition. Ambition is a beautiful thing. It drives you. It inspires you. It helps you grow. But ambition without boundaries becomes self-destructive. It becomes a force that pushes you beyond your limits. It becomes something that consumes your energy rather than fuels it. Healthy perfectionism asks you to create a relationship with your ambition that is sustainable. It asks you to recognize when you need to slow down. It asks you to honor your limits. It asks you to treat yourself with respect. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to take breaks. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to step away. Breaks are not a sign of weakness. They are a sign of wisdom. They are what allow you to return with clarity, energy, and creativity. The Nine of Wands reverse shows that you've been pushing yourself to the point of exhaustion. Healthy perfectionism asks you to break that pattern. It asks you to recognize that rest is part of the process. It asks you to allow yourself to breathe. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to ask for help. You do not have to carry everything alone. You do not have to be the strongest person in every situation. You do not have to pretend you're fine when you're overwhelmed. Asking for help is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of strength. It is a sign that you value yourself enough to seek support. The Ten of Wands upright shows that you've been carrying far too much on your own. Healthy perfectionism asks you to share the load. It asks you to recognize that you deserve support. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to make mistakes. Mistakes are not evidence of failure. They are evidence of growth. They are part of the learning process. They are what help you refine your skills. They are what help you evolve. Perfectionism often makes people terrified of making mistakes. But mistakes are not something to fear. They are something to embrace. Healthy perfectionism asks you to see mistakes as opportunities rather than threats. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to be proud of yourself. You do not have to wait until everything is perfect before you celebrate. You do not have to reach some distant milestone before you feel good about your progress. You are allowed to acknowledge your efforts. You are allowed to appreciate your growth. You are allowed to feel proud of what you've accomplished. The Two of Wands reverse shows that you've been holding yourself back from fully stepping into your potential. Healthy perfectionism asks you to recognize your own strength. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to enjoy the journey. You do not have to rush. You do not have to force yourself to meet unrealistic timelines. You do not have to pressure yourself to achieve everything at once. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that you've been stuck in a cycle of pushing, burning out, and starting over. Healthy perfectionism asks you to break that cycle. It asks you to slow down. It asks you to trust the process. It asks you to recognize that growth unfolds naturally when you create the right conditions. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to be human. You are allowed to feel tired. You are allowed to feel uncertain. You are allowed to feel overwhelmed. You are allowed to feel vulnerable. You do not have to be strong all the time. You do not have to be perfect. You do not have to have everything figured out. Healthy perfectionism asks you to honor your humanity. It asks you to treat yourself with compassion. It asks you to recognize that you're doing your best. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to choose ease. You do not have to choose the hardest path in order to feel worthy. You do not have to struggle in order to prove your strength. You do not have to suffer in order to earn success. Ease is not laziness. Ease is alignment. Ease is clarity. Ease is choosing what supports your well-being. Healthy perfectionism asks you to choose ease when it serves you. It asks you to recognize that you do not have to make everything difficult. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to redefine what perfection means to you. Perfection does not have to mean flawless. Perfection can mean authentic. Perfection can mean aligned. Perfection can mean meaningful. Perfection can mean true to yourself. When you redefine perfection, you free yourself from unrealistic expectations. You allow yourself to create something that feels real rather than something that feels forced. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to grow without pressure. You do not have to force yourself to improve. You do not have to push yourself to the limit. You do not have to constantly monitor your progress. Growth happens naturally when you create the right environment. It happens when you rest. It happens when you play. It happens when you explore. It happens when you allow yourself to be curious. Healthy perfectionism asks you to trust that growth will happen without pressure. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to be enough as you are. You do not have to earn your worth. You do not have to prove anything. You do not have to achieve perfection in order to deserve love, respect, or rest. You are enough right now. You are enough even when you're learning. You are enough even when you're imperfect. You are enough even when you're resting. Healthy perfectionism asks you to internalize this truth. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to take up space without having to justify it. You do not have to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. You do not have to minimize your achievements to avoid seeming arrogant. You do not have to hide your talents out of fear that someone will judge you. Perfectionism often makes people feel like they must constantly prove their right to exist in certain spaces. But you are allowed to take up space simply because you are here. You are allowed to express yourself. You are allowed to shine. You are allowed to be seen. Healthy perfectionism asks you to step into your presence without apology. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to grow in ways that feel authentic to you, not in ways that others expect. You do not have to follow someone else's blueprint. You do not have to match someone else's pace. You do not have to pursue goals that don't resonate with you. Perfectionism often pushes people toward paths that look impressive rather than paths that feel meaningful. But healthy perfectionism asks you to choose authenticity over appearance. It asks you to honor your own desires. It asks you to build a life that reflects who you truly are. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to rest without guilt. Rest is not a reward. Rest is a necessity. It is what allows your mind to reset, your creativity to flourish, and your body to recover. The Ten of Wands upright shows that you've been carrying far too much, often without giving yourself permission to pause. Healthy perfectionism asks you to integrate rest into your routine rather than treating it as something you must earn. It asks you to recognize that rest enhances your performance rather than detracts from it. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be imperfect in front of others. You do not have to hide your struggles. You do not have to pretend you have everything under control. You do not have to maintain an image of flawlessness. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is connection. It is authenticity. It is what allows others to relate to you. When you allow yourself to be imperfect in front of others, you create space for genuine relationships. You create space for support. You create space for understanding. Healthy perfectionism asks you to let go of the need to appear perfect and instead embrace the courage to be real. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to change your standards as you grow. What felt important to you 5 years ago may not feel important now. What you once considered essential may no longer align with your values. Perfectionism often traps people in outdated expectations. But healthy perfectionism allows you to evolve. It allows you to refine your standards as you gain clarity. It allows you to choose what truly matters to you now rather than clinging to old ideals. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to prioritize your well-being. You do not have to sacrifice your mental health for achievement. You do not have to push yourself to the point of burnout. You do not have to ignore your emotional needs in order to meet external expectations. The 9 of Wands reverse shows that you've been pushing yourself beyond your limits. Healthy perfectionism asks you to honor your well-being as a non-negotiable part of your life. It asks you to recognize that you cannot perform at your best when you are depleted. It asks you to treat your well-being as a foundation rather than an afterthought. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to take your time. You do not have to rush your growth. You do not have to force yourself to meet arbitrary deadlines. You do not have to pressure yourself to achieve everything quickly. The Wheel of Fortune reverse shows that you've been stuck in a cycle of urgency, feeling like you must constantly move forward. Healthy perfectionism asks you to slow down. It asks you to trust that your timing is your own. It asks you to recognize that meaningful growth takes time. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to enjoy your achievements. You do not have to immediately move on to the next goal. You do not have to downplay your success. You do not have to minimize your accomplishments. You are allowed to celebrate yourself. You are allowed to feel proud. You are allowed to acknowledge how far you've come. The 2 of Wands reverse shows that you've been hesitant to fully step into your potential. Healthy perfectionism asks you to embrace your achievements without guilt. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to be gentle with yourself. You do not have to be harsh. You do not have to be critical. You do not have to be demanding. Gentleness is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is what allows you to grow without fear. It is what allows you to learn without shame. It is what allows you to evolve without self-punishment. Healthy perfectionism asks you to replace self-criticism with self-support. It asks you to speak to yourself with kindness. It asks you to treat yourself with the same compassion you would offer to someone you love. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to make choices that prioritize your peace. You do not have to choose chaos. You do not have to choose stress. You do not have to choose environments that drain you. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to choose simplicity. You are allowed to choose what supports your well-being. The 10 of Wands upright shows that you've been carrying burdens that are not yours to carry. Healthy perfectionism asks you to put down what is not yours. It asks you to choose peace over pressure. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to trust yourself. You do not have to second-guess every decision. You do not have to seek constant reassurance. You do not have to doubt your abilities. The Page of Swords reversed shows that your mind has been tangled in overthinking. Healthy perfectionism asks you to trust your instincts. It asks you to trust your experience. It asks you to trust your inner wisdom. When you trust yourself, you create a foundation of confidence that supports your growth. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to let go of what no longer serves you. You do not have to hold on to outdated expectations. You do not have to cling to old habits. You do not have to maintain patterns that drain your energy. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that you've been stuck in cycles that no longer align with who you are becoming. Healthy perfectionism asks you to release those cycles. It asks you to create space for new possibilities. It asks you to allow yourself to evolve. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to be proud of your effort, not just your results. You do not have to achieve perfection in order to feel proud. You do not have to meet every expectation. You do not have to produce flawless outcomes. Effort matters. Intention matters. Growth matters. Healthy perfectionism asks you to acknowledge the value of your effort. It asks you to recognize that showing up is an achievement in itself. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be supported. You do not have to do everything alone. You do not have to carry every burden. You do not have to be the one who holds everything together. The Six of Pentacles reversed shows that you've been giving far more than you've been receiving. Healthy perfectionism asks you to allow yourself to receive support. It asks you to recognize that you deserve care. It asks you to open yourself to help. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create boundaries with your own expectations. You do not have to meet every standard you set. You do not have to push yourself to the limit. You do not have to hold yourself to impossible expectations. Healthy perfectionism asks you to create realistic standards. It asks you to honor your capacity. It asks you to recognize that your expectations should support your growth, not sabotage it. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be a work in progress. You do not have to have everything figured out. You do not have to be perfect. You do not have to be complete. You are allowed to grow. You are allowed to learn. You are allowed to evolve. Healthy perfectionism asks you to embrace the journey rather than fixating on the destination. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to choose what matters most to you. You do not have to excel in every area. You do not have to pursue every goal. You do not have to meet every expectation. You are allowed to prioritize. You are allowed to focus. You are allowed to choose what truly matters. The Ten of Wands upright shows that you've been carrying too many responsibilities. Healthy perfectionism asks you to choose what deserves your energy. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be imperfect and still worthy. You do not have to earn your worth. You do not have to prove anything. You do not have to achieve perfection in order to deserve love, rest, or respect. You are worthy simply because you exist. Healthy perfectionism asks you to internalize this truth. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to build a life that feels sustainable rather than impressive. You do not have to chase constant achievement. You do not have to fill your schedule to the brim. You do not have to prove your worth through busyness. Sustainability means creating a rhythm that supports your well-being, your creativity, and your long-term growth. It means choosing habits that nourish you rather than drain you. It means recognizing that consistency matters more than intensity. The Ten of Wands upright shows that you've been operating at a pace that isn't sustainable. Healthy perfectionism asks you to create a life that you can maintain without burning out. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be proud of your resilience without glorifying struggle. You have endured a lot. You have pushed through challenges. You have shown strength in moments when you felt exhausted. But you do not have to keep proving your resilience by taking on more than you can handle. You do not have to keep demonstrating your strength through suffering. Healthy perfectionism asks you to honor your resilience while also choosing ease where possible. It asks you to recognize that strength is not measured by how much you endure, but by how well you care for yourself. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create systems that support your goals. You do not have to rely on willpower alone. You do not have to push yourself through sheer force. Systems help you stay organized, focused, and grounded. They create structure without rigidity. They help you break big goals into manageable steps. They help you maintain momentum without overwhelming yourself. The Page of Swords reverse shows that your mind has been overloaded with scattered thoughts and overanalysis. Healthy perfectionism asks you to create systems that bring clarity and calm. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to take imperfect action. You do not have to wait until everything is perfectly planned. You do not have to wait until you feel completely ready. You do not have to wait until you have every detail figured out. The Two of Wands reversed shows that hesitation has been holding you back. Healthy perfectionism asks you to move forward even when things feel uncertain. It asks you to trust that clarity will come through action. It asks you to recognize that progress is more important than perfection. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to redefine productivity. Productivity is not about constant output. It is not about filling every moment with tasks. It is not about pushing yourself to exhaustion. Productivity can mean rest. It can mean reflection. It can mean creativity. It can mean connection. It can mean healing. Healthy perfectionism asks you to broaden your definition of productivity so that it includes everything that supports your growth, not just the visible results. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to slow down without losing momentum. Slowing down does not mean giving up. It does not mean falling behind. It does not mean losing your drive. Slowing down allows you to move with intention. It allows you to make thoughtful choices. It allows you to stay aligned with your values. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that you've been caught in a cycle of rushing. Healthy perfectionism asks you to break that cycle by choosing a pace that supports your well-being. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to feel proud of your growth even when it's not visible to others. Not all progress is external. Not all growth can be measured. Some of the most meaningful changes happen internally. They happen in your mindset, your habits, your boundaries, your self-talk. The Six of Pentacles reversed shows that you've been giving so much of yourself without receiving enough recognition or support. Healthy perfectionism asks you to validate your own growth rather than waiting for external acknowledgement. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to create a life that feels good to you, even if it doesn't look impressive to others. You do not have to chase goals that don't resonate with you. You do not have to pursue achievements that don't bring you joy. You do not have to live according to someone else's definition of success. Healthy perfectionism asks you to build a life that feels meaningful, peaceful, and aligned with your values. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to rest before you reach burnout. You do not have to wait until you're exhausted. You do not have to wait until you're overwhelmed. You do not have to wait until you're struggling. Rest is most effective when it's proactive rather than reactive. The Nine of Wands reversed shows that you've been pushing yourself to the point of depletion. Healthy perfectionism asks you to rest early, rest often, and rest without guilt. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be imperfect and still make progress. Imperfection does not erase your effort. It does not diminish your growth. It does not invalidate your achievements. Imperfection is part of the process. It is what allows you to learn. It is what allows you to refine your skills. It is what allows you to evolve. Healthy perfectionism asks you to embrace imperfection as a natural and necessary part of your journey. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to choose what you want to be excellent at. You do not have to excel in every area. You do not have to be perfect at everything. You are allowed to choose your priorities. You are allowed to focus your energy on what truly matters to you. The Ten of Wands upright shows that you've been spreading yourself too thin. Healthy perfectionism asks you to concentrate your energy where it will have the greatest impact. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be supported by routines that feel nourishing rather than restrictive. Routines can create stability. They can reduce decision fatigue. They can help you stay grounded. But routines should not feel like cages. They should not feel like obligations. They should not feel like pressure. Healthy perfectionism asks you to create routines that support your well-being and your goals without overwhelming you. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to take breaks from striving. You do not have to be in improvement mode all the time. You do not have to constantly push yourself. You do not have to always be working towards something. There is value in simply being. There is value in rest, stillness, and presence. Healthy perfectionism asks you to honor the moments when you are not striving because those moments are essential for your long-term growth. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be proud of yourself even when you're not perfect. You do not have to wait until you reach some ideal version of yourself. You do not have to wait until you achieve every goal. You do not have to wait until you eliminate every flaw. You are allowed to feel proud of who you are right now. Healthy perfectionism asks you to acknowledge your strengths, your resilience, and your growth. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create boundaries with people who expect too much from you. You do not have to meet everyone's expectations. You do not have to be everything to everyone. You do not have to sacrifice your well-being to please others. The Six of Pentacles reversed shows that you've been giving more than you receive. Healthy perfectionism asks you to protect your energy by setting boundaries that honor your needs. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to take your goals one step at a time. You do not have to accomplish everything at once. You do not have to overwhelm yourself with massive expectations. You do not have to pressure yourself to make huge leaps. Small steps create sustainable progress. Small steps build confidence. Small steps lead to meaningful change. Healthy perfectionism asks you to embrace gradual growth rather than forcing rapid transformation. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to enjoy the process of learning. You do not have to be perfect immediately. You do not have to master everything quickly. You do not have to avoid being a beginner. Learning is a journey. It is meant to be explored with curiosity, patience, and openness. Healthy perfectionism asks you to embrace the joy of learning rather than fearing the discomfort of imperfection. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to create a life that feels balanced. Balance does not mean doing everything equally. It means giving your energy to what matters most in each moment. It means honoring your needs. It means creating space for rest, work, creativity, connection, and solitude. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that your life has felt unbalanced. Healthy perfectionism asks you to restore that balance by choosing what supports your well-being. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to trust the timing of your life. You do not have to rush. You do not have to force outcomes. You do not have to pressure yourself to meet arbitrary timelines. Your journey is unfolding exactly as it needs to. Healthy perfectionism asks you to trust that you are not behind. You are not late. You are not failing. You are growing at the pace that is right for you. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your goals that feels collaborative rather than adversarial. Your goals are not meant to be enemies you must conquer. They are not meant to be mountains you must climb alone. They are invitations. They are pathways. They are expressions of your desires. When you approach your goals with gentleness rather than pressure, you create space for creativity, curiosity, and joy. The Page of Swords reversed shows that your mind has been treating your goals like threats, something to overthink and analyze endlessly. Healthy perfectionism asks you to shift into a mindset where your goals feel like companions rather than burdens. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to adjust your expectations without feeling like you've failed. Adjusting your expectations is not giving up. It is not lowering your standards. It is responding to reality with wisdom. It is recognizing that circumstances change, energy fluctuates, and priorities evolve. The Wheel of Fortune reversed highlights that you've been stuck in rigid cycles, feeling like you must stick to your original plan even when it no longer fits. Healthy perfectionism asks you to adapt with grace. It asks you to honor your current capacity rather than forcing yourself to meet outdated expectations. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a life that feels spacious. You do not have to fill every moment. You do not have to constantly be doing something. You do not have to live in a state of perpetual motion. Spaciousness allows your mind to breathe. It allows your creativity to flourish. It allows your intuition to speak. The Ten of Wands upright shows that your life has felt crowded with responsibilities. Healthy perfectionism asks you to create space for rest, space for reflection, space for joy, space for simply being. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be proud of your boundaries. Boundaries are not barriers. They are not walls. They are not signs of selfishness. Boundaries are expressions of self-respect. They are what protect your energy, your time, and your well-being. The Six of Pentacles reversed shows that you've been giving too much without receiving enough in return. Healthy perfectionism asks you to set boundaries that honor your needs. It asks you to recognize that boundaries are essential for sustainable growth. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to be imperfect in the eyes of others. You do not have to meet everyone's expectations. You do not have to be universally admired. You do not have to avoid criticism at all costs. Trying to please everyone is a losing battle. It drains your energy and dilutes your authenticity. Healthy perfectionism asks you to focus on what feels true to you rather than trying to meet external standards. It asks you to recognize that your worth is not determined by other people's opinions. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to take breaks from self-improvement. You do not have to constantly work on yourself. You do not have to always be healing, growing, or evolving. There is value in simply living. There is value in enjoying the present moment. There is value in letting yourself be. The Nine of Wands reversed shows that you've been in a state of constant self-monitoring, always trying to fix or improve something. Healthy perfectionism asks you to rest from that. It asks you to recognize that you are allowed to exist without constantly striving. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to trust your future self. You do not have to solve every problem today. You do not have to prepare for every possibility. You do not have to anticipate every challenge. Your future self is capable. Your future self is resourceful. Your future self will handle things when they arise. The Page of Swords reverse shows that you've been trying to stay ahead of everything, mentally preparing for scenarios that may never happen. Healthy perfectionism asks you to trust that you will handle the future when it arrives. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to let go of guilt. Guilt is one of the most common emotions tied to perfectionism. Guilt for resting. Guilt for saying no. Guilt for not doing enough. Guilt for making mistakes. Guilt for being human. But guilt is not a productive motivator. It drains your energy and clouds your judgment. Healthy perfectionism asks you to release guilt and replace it with responsibility, intention, and self-respect. It asks you to recognize that guilt is not required for growth. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a life that feels emotionally safe. Emotional safety is not a luxury. It is a necessity. It is what allows you to take risks, express yourself, and grow without fear. Emotional safety comes from boundaries, self-compassion, supportive relationships, and environments that honor your needs. The Six of Pentacles reverse shows that you've been in situations where emotional safety was lacking. Healthy perfectionism asks you to prioritize environments that support your well-being. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be proud of your discipline without letting it become self-punishment. Discipline is a powerful tool. It helps you stay consistent. It helps you build habits. It helps you achieve long-term goals. But discipline becomes harmful when it turns into rigidity, self-criticism, or pressure. The Ten of Wands upright shows that your discipline has sometimes crossed into self-burden. Healthy perfectionism asks you to use discipline as a supportive structure rather than a weapon against yourself. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your inner critic that is constructive rather than destructive. Your inner critic is not your enemy. It is a part of you that wants to protect you from failure, embarrassment, or disappointment. But when your inner critic becomes too loud, it can sabotage your confidence. Healthy perfectionism asks you to listen to your inner critic with discernment. It asks you to take what is helpful and release what is harmful. It asks you to transform your inner critic into an inner coach. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to take risks. You do not have to stay in your comfort zone. You do not have to avoid uncertainty. You do not have to wait until you feel completely ready. The Two of Wands reversed shows that fear of imperfection has held you back from taking bold steps. Healthy perfectionism asks you to take risks with intention. It asks you to trust that you can handle whatever happens. It asks you to recognize that growth often requires stepping into the unknown. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to be proud of your journey, even if it has been messy. Your journey has shaped you. It has taught you resilience, compassion, and strength. It has helped you grow in ways you may not even realize. The Wheel of Fortune reverse shows that your journey has included cycles that felt frustrating or stagnant. Healthy perfectionism asks you to honor your journey rather than judge it. It asks you to recognize that every step has contributed to who you are becoming. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to create a life that feels aligned with your values. Alignment means living in a way that reflects what matters most to you. It means making choices that honor your truth. It means creating a life that feels authentic. The Ten of Wands upright shows that you've been carrying responsibilities that may not align with your values. Healthy perfectionism asks you to release what is misaligned and focus on what feels true. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to be gentle with your timeline. You do not have to rush your healing. You do not have to accelerate your growth. You do not have to pressure yourself to reach milestones quickly. The Wheel of Fortune reverse shows that you've been feeling behind. Healthy perfectionism asks you to trust that your timeline is unfolding exactly as it needs to. It asks you to recognize that growth cannot be forced. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be proud of your boundaries with yourself. Boundaries with yourself are just as important as boundaries with others. They help you avoid burnout. They help you stay aligned with your values. They help you maintain balance. The Nine of Wands reverse shows that you've been pushing yourself beyond your limits. Healthy perfectionism asks you to create boundaries that protect your energy. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to choose rest even when there is more to do. There will always be more to do. There will always be tasks waiting. There will always be responsibilities. But you cannot wait until everything is done before you rest. Healthy perfectionism asks you to rest because you need it, not because you've earned it. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to feel proud of your progress even when it's slow. Slow progress is still progress. Slow growth is still growth. Slow steps still move you forward. The Two of Wands reverse shows that you've been judging your progress harshly. Healthy perfectionism asks you to honor your pace. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a life that feels emotionally fulfilling, not just productive. Productivity is not the only measure of a meaningful life. Emotional fulfillment matters. Joy matters. Connection matters. Peace matters. Healthy perfectionism asks you to prioritize emotional fulfillment alongside achievement. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to honor your emotional needs without feeling like they interfere with your goals. Your emotions are not obstacles. They are signals. They tell you when you're overwhelmed, when you're inspired, when you're drained, when you're aligned, and when something needs to change. The Nine of Wands reverse shows that you've been pushing through emotional exhaustion instead of listening to it. Healthy perfectionism asks you to treat your emotions as valuable information rather than inconveniences. It asks you to recognize that emotional awareness strengthens your ability to grow. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to create a relationship with rest that feels nourishing rather than guilty. Rest is not something you must justify. It is not something you must earn. It is not something you must apologize for. Rest is part of your rhythm. It is part of your creativity. It is part of your clarity. The Ten of Wands upright shows that you've been carrying burdens that leave little room for rest. Healthy perfectionism asks you to integrate rest into your life as a non-negotiable part of your well-being. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to be proud of the small steps you take. Small steps are often the most powerful because they are sustainable. They build momentum. They create habits. They move you forward in ways that feel manageable. The Two of Wands reversed shows that you've been underestimating the value of small steps, feeling like only big leaps count. Healthy perfectionism asks you to honor every step, no matter how small, because each one contributes to your growth. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to create a life that feels emotionally spacious. Emotional spaciousness means giving yourself room to breathe, reflect, and feel without pressure. It means not filling every moment with tasks or expectations. It means allowing yourself to exist without constantly evaluating your performance. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that your emotional landscape has felt tight, pressured, and cyclical. Healthy perfectionism asks you to create emotional space so you can grow with clarity rather than urgency. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to trust your intuition. Perfectionism often makes people rely solely on logic, analysis, and planning. But intuition is just as important. It guides you toward what feels aligned. It warns you when something is off. It helps you make decisions that honor your values. The Page of Swords reversed shows that your mind has been overactive, drowning out your intuitive voice. Healthy perfectionism asks you to reconnect with your intuition and allow it to guide your choices. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to release the fear of disappointing others. You cannot control how others feel. You cannot meet everyone's expectations. You cannot shape your life around avoiding disappointment. The Six of Pentacles reversed shows that you've been giving too much of yourself in an attempt to avoid letting others down. Healthy perfectionism asks you to prioritize your own well-being over the fear of disappointing others. It asks you to recognize that your life is yours to live. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your goals that feels flexible. Flexibility does not mean inconsistency. It means adaptability. It means adjusting your approach when necessary. It means responding to challenges with creativity rather than rigidity. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that you've been stuck in patterns that feel inflexible. Healthy perfectionism asks you to embrace flexibility as a strength. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be imperfect and still deeply worthy of love. Love is not something you earn through achievement. It is not something you secure through perfection. It is something you deserve simply because you exist. The Nine of Wands reversed shows that you've been trying to prove your worth through endurance. Healthy perfectionism asks you to recognize that you are worthy of love even when you're tired, even when you're imperfect, even when you're resting. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your inner world that feels compassionate. Your inner world is where your thoughts, emotions, dreams, and fears live. It is where your creativity is born. It is where your intuition speaks. When you treat your inner world with compassion, you create a foundation of emotional safety. The Page of Swords reversed shows that your inner world has been filled with self-criticism and overthinking. Healthy perfectionism asks you to replace that with gentleness and understanding. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to take responsibility without taking blame. Responsibility is empowering. It allows you to make choices that support your growth. Blame is disempowering. It traps you in shame. The Ten of Wands upright shows that you've been carrying responsibilities that aren't yours. Healthy perfectionism asks you to take responsibility for what is yours and release what is not. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a life that feels aligned with your energy rather than your fears. Fear-based perfectionism pushes you to overwork, overthink, and overextend. Energy-aligned perfectionism asks you to honor your natural rhythms. It asks you to work when you feel inspired. It asks you to rest when you feel tired. It asks you to trust your body and your intuition. The Two of Wands reverse shows that fear has been influencing your decisions. Healthy perfectionism asks you to shift into alignment. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to celebrate yourself without feeling like you're being arrogant. Celebration is not arrogance. It is acknowledgement. It is gratitude. It is recognition of your effort and growth. The Six of Pentacles reversed shows that you've been withholding celebration from yourself. Healthy perfectionism asks you to celebrate your achievements, your resilience, and your progress. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your goals that feels emotionally fulfilling. Goals are not just tasks. They are expressions of your desires, your values, and your dreams. When your goals feel emotionally fulfilling, they energize you rather than drain you. The Ten of Wands upright shows that some of your goals have felt heavy. Healthy perfectionism asks you to choose goals that feel meaningful rather than obligatory. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to release the belief that you must always be strong. Strength is not constant. It is not a requirement. It is not a measure of your worth. You are allowed to be vulnerable. You are allowed to ask for help. You are allowed to rest. The Nine of Wands reversed shows that you've been trying to be strong for too long. Healthy perfectionism asks you to honor your vulnerability. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to trust the unfolding of your life.
You do not have to control everything.
You do not have to predict every outcome. You do not have to force your path. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that you've been trying to control cycles that are meant to unfold naturally. Healthy perfectionism asks you to trust the process. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be proud of your healing. Healing is not linear. It is not predictable. It is not something you can perfect, but it is something you can honor. The Page of Swords reversed shows that you've been analyzing your healing rather than appreciating it. Healthy perfectionism asks you to honor your healing journey. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a life that feels emotionally rich. Emotional richness means experiencing joy, connection, creativity, and meaning. It means allowing yourself to feel deeply. It means embracing the full spectrum of your humanity. The Six of Pentacles reversed shows that emotional richness has been overshadowed by responsibility. Healthy perfectionism asks you to prioritize emotional richness. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be imperfect and still deeply capable. Imperfection does not diminish your abilities. It does not erase your strengths. It does not undermine your potential. The Two of Wands reverse shows that fear of imperfection has held you back. Healthy perfectionism asks you to trust your capability even when things aren't perfect. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your ambition that feels supportive rather than overwhelming. Ambition is not the enemy. It becomes harmful only when it is tied to fear, pressure, or self-punishment. The Ten of Wands upright shows that your ambition has sometimes become a burden. Healthy perfectionism asks you to reconnect with the part of your ambition that feels inspiring. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be proud of your journey, even if it has been difficult. Your journey has shaped you. It has taught you resilience, compassion, and strength. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that your journey has included cycles that felt frustrating. Healthy perfectionism asks you to honor your journey rather than judge it. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your work that feels meaningful rather than draining. Work is not meant to consume your identity. It is not meant to define your worth. It is not meant to be the only measure of your value. The Ten of Wands upright shows that you've been carrying work in a way that feels heavy, obligatory, and exhausting. Healthy perfectionism asks you to reconnect with the parts of your work that feel purposeful. It asks you to release the parts that feel like burdens you've taken on out of fear or habit. It asks you to remember that your work is something you do, not something you are. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be proud of your boundaries around time. Time is one of your most precious resources. When you protect your time, you protect your energy, your creativity, and your well-being. The Six of Pentacles reversed shows that your time has often been given away too freely, leaving you depleted. Healthy perfectionism asks you to honor your time as something valuable. It asks you to create boundaries that prevent others from draining it. It asks you to use your time in ways that support your growth rather than sabotage it. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your inner voice that feels supportive. Your inner voice should not be a source of fear. It should not be a source of pressure. It should not be a source of shame. Your inner voice is meant to guide you, encourage you, and help you navigate challenges. The Page of Swords reversed shows that your inner voice has been tangled in overthinking and self-criticism. Healthy perfectionism asks you to cultivate an inner voice that speaks with clarity, compassion, and confidence. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to release the belief that you must constantly be improving. Improvement is not a requirement for worthiness. It is not something you must chase endlessly. It is something that happens naturally when you create the right conditions. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that you've been caught in a cycle of constant self-evaluation. Healthy perfectionism asks you to step out of that cycle. It asks you to allow yourself to simply be without constantly striving to become. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your goals that feels emotionally balanced. Goals should not feel like weights on your shoulders. They should feel like invitations to grow. They should feel like expressions of your desires. They should feel like pathways toward fulfillment. The Ten of Wands upright shows that your goals have sometimes felt like obligations. Healthy perfectionism asks you to choose goals that feel aligned with your heart rather than goals that feel imposed by external expectations. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be imperfect and still deeply deserving of rest. Rest is not a reward for perfection. It is a necessity for well-being. The Nine of Wands reverse shows that you've been pushing yourself to the point of exhaustion. Healthy perfectionism asks you to rest because you need it, not because you've earned it. It asks you to recognize that rest is part of your growth. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your creativity that feels free rather than pressured. Creativity thrives in spaciousness, curiosity, and play. It withers under pressure, fear, and perfectionism. The Page of Swords reversed shows that your creativity has been tangled in overthinking. Healthy perfectionism asks you to create space for creativity to flow naturally. It asks you to allow yourself to explore without judgment. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to release the belief that you must always be productive. Productivity is not the measure of your worth. It is not the measure of your value. It is not the measure of your identity. The Six of Pentacles reversed shows that you've been giving your energy to productivity at the expense of your well-being. Healthy perfectionism asks you to redefine productivity in a way that includes rest, reflection, and emotional nourishment. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your future that feels hopeful rather than pressured. Your future is not a test you must pass. It is not a challenge you must conquer. It is a landscape of possibilities. The Two of Wands reversed shows that fear of imperfection has made your future feel intimidating. Healthy perfectionism asks you to view your future with curiosity rather than fear. It asks you to trust that you will grow into the person you need to be. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be proud of your resilience without letting it become your identity. You are more than your ability to endure. You are more than your strength. You are more than your perseverance. The Nine of Wands reverse shows that you've been relying on resilience as a survival mechanism. Healthy perfectionism asks you to build a life where resilience is not constantly required. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your inner world that feels peaceful. Peace is not something you must earn. It is something you cultivate through boundaries, rest, and self-compassion. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that your inner world has felt chaotic. Healthy perfectionism asks you to create inner peace by releasing pressure and embracing gentleness. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to choose what you want to be excellent at. Excellence is not required in every area of your life. It is something you choose intentionally. The Ten of Wands upright shows that you've been trying to excel in too many areas at once. Healthy perfectionism asks you to focus your excellence where it matters most to you. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your boundaries that feels empowering. Boundaries are not limitations. They are expressions of self-respect. They are what protect your energy, your time, and your emotional well-being. The Six of Pentacles reverse shows that your boundaries have been too loose. Healthy perfectionism asks you to strengthen them with confidence. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be imperfect and still deeply capable of achieving your dreams. Imperfection does not diminish your potential. It does not undermine your abilities. It does not limit your future. The Two of Wands reverse shows that fear of imperfection has held you back. Healthy perfectionism asks you to trust your capability even when things aren't perfect. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your life that feels intentional. Intentionality means choosing what aligns with your values, your desires, and your well-being. It means living with purpose rather than pressure. The Ten of Wands upright shows that you've been living with too much pressure. Healthy perfectionism asks you to shift into intentionality. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be proud of your journey, even if it has been nonlinear. Growth is not a straight line. It is a spiral. It is a series of cycles. It is a process of becoming. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that your journey has included cycles that felt frustrating. Healthy perfectionism asks you to honor your journey rather than judge it. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your self-worth that is unconditional. Your worth is not tied to your achievements. It is not tied to your productivity. It is not tied to your perfection. Your worth is inherent. The Six of Pentacles reversed shows that you've been tying your worth to what you give. Healthy perfectionism asks you to recognize that you are worthy simply because you exist. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your life that feels rooted in self-trust. Self-trust is the foundation of healthy striving. It is what allows you to take risks without fear. It is what allows you to rest without guilt. It is what allows you to grow without pressure. The Page of Swords reversed shows that your self-trust has been overshadowed by overthinking. Healthy perfectionism asks you to rebuild that trust by listening to your intuition, honoring your needs, and recognizing your own capability. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be proud of your evolution. You are not the same person you were a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. You have grown, learned, healed, and transformed. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that you've been so focused on what hasn't changed that you've overlooked what has. Healthy perfectionism asks you to acknowledge your evolution with gratitude rather than judgment. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your dreams that feels expansive. Your dreams are not meant to be cages. They are meant to be invitations into possibility. They are meant to inspire you, not intimidate you. The Two of Wands reverse shows that fear has made your dreams feel overwhelming. Healthy perfectionism asks you to reconnect with the excitement behind your dreams rather than the pressure. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be imperfect and still deeply aligned with your purpose. Purpose is not about perfection. It is about authenticity. It is about intention. It is about showing up in ways that feel true to you. The Ten of Wands upright shows that you've been carrying your purpose like a burden. Healthy perfectionism asks you to carry it like a calling instead. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your inner world that feels nurturing. Your inner world is where your creativity, intuition, and emotional truth live. When you nurture your inner world, you create a foundation for sustainable growth. The Six of Pentacles reverse shows that you've been giving outwardly without nurturing inwardly. Healthy perfectionism asks you to restore that balance. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be proud of your courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to move forward despite fear. The Nine of Wands reverse shows that you've been brave in ways you haven't acknowledged. Healthy perfectionism asks you to honor that courage rather than overlooking it. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your life that feels emotionally honest. Emotional honesty means acknowledging your feelings without judgment. It means allowing yourself to feel without suppressing or rationalizing. It means recognizing your emotional truth even when it's inconvenient. The Page of Swords reversed shows that your emotions have sometimes been overshadowed by analysis. Healthy perfectionism asks you to honor your emotional truth. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to release the belief that you must always be in control. Control is an illusion. It creates tension, anxiety, and pressure. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that you've been trying to control cycles that are meant to unfold naturally. Healthy perfectionism asks you to surrender control and trust the process. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your identity that feels fluid. You are not meant to stay the same. You are meant to evolve. You are meant to grow. You are meant to discover new parts of yourself. The Ten of Wands upright shows that you've been carrying an identity shaped by responsibility rather than authenticity. Healthy perfectionism asks you to release identities that no longer fit. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be imperfect and still deeply deserving of compassion. Compassion is not something you must earn. It is something you deserve simply because you are human. The Six of Pentacles reversed shows that you've been withholding compassion from yourself. Healthy perfectionism asks you to offer yourself the compassion you freely give to others. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your life that feels grounded. Groundedness comes from presence, intention, and self-awareness. It comes from choosing what aligns with your values. It comes from releasing what drains your energy. The Two of Wands reversed shows that you've been living in your mind more than in your body. Healthy perfectionism asks you to ground yourself in the present moment. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be proud of your boundaries with your own expectations. Expectations can be supportive or suffocating. The Ten of Wands upright shows that your expectations have sometimes been too heavy. Healthy perfectionism asks you to create expectations that support your growth rather than overwhelm you. Healthy perfectionism also involves recognizing that you are allowed to create a relationship with your life that feels emotionally balanced. Emotional balance does not mean avoiding difficult feelings. It means allowing yourself to feel without being consumed. It means creating space for joy, rest, and connection. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that your emotional landscape has felt cyclical and pressured. Healthy perfectionism asks you to restore balance. Healthy perfectionism also requires you to recognize that you are allowed to be imperfect and still deeply capable of creating a meaningful life. Imperfection does not diminish your potential. It does not undermine your purpose. It does not limit your future. The Two of Wands reversed shows that fear of imperfection has held you back. Healthy perfectionism asks you to trust your capability. And now, Group 2, we move into the guidance from your spirit guides. Your spirit guides want you to know that you were never meant to live under the weight of impossible expectations. They want you to understand that your desire to do well is a gift, not a burden. But they also want you to recognize that this gift becomes distorted when it is rooted in fear rather than love. They are asking you to shift your relationship with your own ambition so that it becomes a source of empowerment rather than exhaustion. Your guides say that you have been carrying responsibilities that were never meant to be yours. You have taken on the emotional weight of other people's expectations, fears, and disappointments. You have tried to protect others from discomfort by overextending yourself. You have tried to earn love through effort. Your guides want you to release this. They want you to understand that love is not something you must earn. It is something you deserve simply because you exist. Your guides also want you to know that you are far more capable than you realize. You have been doubting yourself because you've been measuring your worth through perfection. But your guides see your strength, your resilience, your creativity, and your heart. They want you to trust yourself the way they trust you. They want you to recognize that you are ready for the next chapter of your life, even if you feel uncertain. Your guides say that the cycle you've been stuck in is ending. The Wheel of Fortune reversed shows that you've been repeating patterns rooted in fear, pressure, and self-criticism. But your guides are guiding you toward a new cycle, one rooted in self-trust, alignment, and emotional freedom. They want you to step into this new cycle with openness rather than fear. Your guides also want you to know that rest is part of your purpose. You're not meant to burn yourself out. You're not meant to carry everything alone. You're not meant to sacrifice your well-being for achievement. Your guides are asking you to honor your body, your emotions, and your energy. They want you to rest without guilt. They want you to recognize that rest is what allows your gifts to flourish. Your guides say that you are entering a chapter where your perfectionism becomes a strength rather than a burden. But this requires you to shift from fear-based striving to love-based striving. Fear-based striving says, I must be perfect or I am not enough. Love-based striving says, I care deeply, so I will give my best while honoring my humanity. Your guides want you to choose the second path. Your guides also want you to know that you are supported. You are not alone. They have been with you through every cycle, every challenge, every moment of doubt. They have watched you push yourself beyond your limits. They have watched you carry burdens that were too heavy. They have watched you try to earn worthiness through effort. And now they are guiding you toward a life where you no longer have to do that. Your guides say that your next chapter is about alignment. It is about choosing what feels true to you. It is about releasing what drains you. It is about honoring your needs. It is about trusting your intuition. It is about creating a life that feels emotionally rich, spiritually grounded, and deeply fulfilling. Your guides want you to know that you are enough, not because of what you achieve, not because of how perfectly you perform, not because of how much you give. You are enough because you exist. You are enough because you are human. You are enough because you are you. They ask you to carry this truth with you as you move forward. Let it soften your perfectionism. Let it guide your choices. Let it shape your relationship with yourself. Let it free you from the pressure to be flawless. Your guides say that when you honor your humanity, your gifts shine more brightly. When you honor your needs, your creativity flows more freely. When you honor your boundaries, your energy becomes more powerful. When you honor your truth, your path becomes clearer. They want you to step into this next chapter with gentleness, intention, and trust. They want you to know that you are supported, guided, and loved. They want you to know that you are ready.